My name is Sarah, and the day I buried my daughter, my family came to my house with lawyers, not flowers, not food, and certainly not the quiet, shattered presence of people who loved her, too. They came with documents, notarized, tabbed, and color-coded, actually, which standing there in my funeral dress, I found almost impressive in its audacity. And when I opened that door, still wearing black, still carrying the specific numbness of a woman who's just watched a small white coffin go into the ground, my mother looked at me and said, "Sarah, you're not thinking clearly. Let us handle it." I looked at the paperwork. I looked at my mother and looked at my sister Kim, standing slightly behind her, not meeting my eyes. And I thought, they color-coded it. Or they actually color-coded the documents they brought to my daughter's funeral. And then, beneath that thought, quieter and more important, right on schedule. Because here is what my family did not know. I had known they were coming, not suspected, not feared. Known, with the specific certainty of a woman who had been watching and waiting and preparing quietly for 8 months while they thought they were planning in secret. What they believed was the beginning of their plan was actually the final step of mine. I said, "I'll be in touch." I closed the door. I went to my kitchen. I made tea, because my hands needed something to do, and because Lila always said tea was for when things were serious. And I sat at the table, and I thought about my daughter, and about promises, and about the document sitting in a court archive that my family had just walked straight into. Then I picked up my phone and called the number I had been ready to call for 8 months. But before we continue, make sure to like, subscribe, and tell us your time and location in the comments. Let me tell you about Lila first, because before this becomes a story about betrayal and courtrooms and a family that forgot who they were dealing with, it needs to be a story about her. Her name was Lila Grace Dane, and she was 8 years old when she died. She had been sick since she was 4. Or a rare autoimmune condition that specialists described in clinical language I had spent years learning to translate. Elevated inflammatory markers, organ involvement, progressive deterioration, and that I understood in plain terms as, your daughter is fighting something her body was not built to win. Lila understood it differently. She understood it as, I have less time than other kids, so I should probably use it better. She had, at 8, a perspective on time that most adults I know have not yet reached. She kept a journal, spiral-bound, purple cover. In it, she recorded things she wanted to remember, the exact color of the sky one Tuesday morning, the specific sound of her own laugh when something genuinely surprised her, and in a list titled Things I Know for Sure that she updated periodically and read to me on nights when the pain was too much for sleeping. Things I know for sure. Mom loves me more than everything. Dogs always look happy to see you even when you're not your dog. Being kind costs nothing and buys a lot. Lila, age 7. I kept the journal. It is in the drawer beside my bed. I haven't been able to read past the first page since she died, but I cannot not have it near me. She passed on a Thursday morning in a hospital room I had worked very hard to make feel like somewhere other than a hospital room. String lights, her drawings on the walls, a small speaker playing the playlist she had made and labeled, with characteristic practicality, songs for when you need to be okay. At the end, she was not in pain. And she was not afraid. She looked at me, her eyes, my eyes, dark and direct, and said, "You'll protect it, right? Everything I made?" "Everything," I said. "I promise." She was talking about more than money, but I would protect that too. When Lila was 6, she participated in a documentary about children with rare illnesses. The clip that spread was 37 seconds. An interviewer asks, "What do you want people to know about being sick?" And Lila, in the purple sweater she liked best, says, "I want them to know it's not the whole story. I have a really good life. I just have a shorter one. That's different." Watched 40 million times. What followed? Donations. From strangers. Corporations. People who had lost children and people who hadn't, and people who saw a small person speaking plainly about something enormous and felt moved to do something with that feeling. A trust fund was established, properly, legally, with an estate attorney named Genevieve Crawford, who was the most thorough person I had ever sat across a desk from, which is precisely why I chose her. $940,000, designated for causes supporting children with rare illnesses, managed by Sarah Dane, sole trustee. Lila had been involved in writing the purpose clause. She had dictated specific language to Genevieve, who had written it into the document without blinking. This money is for kids like me, not for anyone else. And then, at Genevieve's suggestion, I had added one more clause, a protective clause, just in case. I had not told my family about it. I had not told my family about a lot of things. That was, as I said, not an accident. Here is the part I have not told publicly until now. 6 months before Lila passed, I started noticing things. Kim calling more than usual, asking questions that were slightly too specific about the trust, how it was structured, whether I had a co-trustee, whether Genevieve was still involved. My mother mentioning twice in 1 month that managing that kind of money alone must be so overwhelming for me. I started paying attention. I hired a private investigator for 3 weeks. I did not need 3 weeks. I had what I needed in 11 days. And then I made a decision that Ethan, when I told him, described as either brilliant or extremely cold-blooded, possibly both. I let them think it was working. I became, in every interaction with my family, slightly more overwhelmed, slightly more scattered. I mentioned once that I had been struggling to keep up with the trust paperwork. I let my mother comfort me about it in the way she comforts people, which is to say she stored the information and said, "We're here if you need us," in the tone of a woman making a note. I let them build their confidence. I went home and updated Genevieve's file. When Kim accessed Lila's medical records through her hospital contact, she found what she was looking for: the prognosis documentation, the timeline. She did not know that 2 weeks after her contact pulled those files, the hospital's privacy officer received an anonymous tip about the unauthorized access. The investigation had been open for 4 months before Lila died. They had been building a case against Kim, while Kim thought she was building a case against me. I tell you this not to seem cold. I was not cold. I was a mother who was losing her daughter and simultaneously watching her family circle like they were waiting for a signal, and I made a choice: fall apart now or fall apart later. I chose later. I have not fully chosen later yet. But first, the courtroom. His office smelled like old books and printer ink. He was 38, calm in the way of someone who has learned stillness is more powerful than volume, and he read the documents my family had filed, submitted to the probate court 2 days after the funeral, which I want you to sit with for a moment. And when he looked up, his expression had shifted into something specific and focused. "They filed 2 days after," he said. Yes. "This affidavit from your mother." He held it up. "This language is too precise to have been written in grief. Someone drafted this weeks ago." 8 months ago, I said, give or take. He looked at me. "You know this." "I have the emails," I said. I put the USB drive on his desk. "I have the hospital investigation file. I have 11 days of surveillance documentation, and I have a phone call with Genevieve Crawford scheduled for this afternoon about a trust clause that I'd like to brief you on before we proceed." Ethan Bright looked at the USB drive, then at me. Then he did something I had not expected from a man of his particular composure. He almost smiled. "Mrs. Dane," he said, "I have been practicing law for 14 years. That I have never had a client come to me more prepared than the people they're filing against." "I had 8 months," I said, "and a reason." He picked up the drive. "Then let's make sure it counts," he said. The emails were the worst of it, not because I hadn't known, I had read them before during those 11 days, but because seeing them in a legal context, printed and labeled as evidence, made them real in a way that knowing had not quite accomplished. My mother to Kim, 14 months ago. The trust is substantial. If Sarah loses control of it, there are options. Kim to my mother, 12 months ago. I spoke to someone at the hospital. The prognosis is what we thought. We need to start the paperwork. My father, passive, follower. The man who went along. To both of them, make sure the lawyer knows we'll need the mental health angle. Her history is useful here. Her history. When I was 23, I had gone through a severe depression following a miscarriage. I had sought help. I had recovered. I had never hidden it. They had found it. They had planned to use my worst year as a weapon in a case about my dead daughter's trust fund. I read those emails once in Ethan's office. Then I put them in a folder and I said, "What's our timeline?" Because if I let myself feel it fully in that moment, I would not have been useful for anything else that day. And I needed to be useful. The feeling was waiting. It could wait a little longer. Ethan watched me process this with the careful attention of a man who has sat with people through difficult things. You don't have to hold it together in here," he said. "I know," I said. "I'll take you up on that after." He nodded. "After," he said, and we got back to work. Her name was Naomi Clark, and she had been my closest friend for 11 years. We had met at a support group for parents of children with serious illnesses. We had found each other in a folding chair circle and had become, over the following decade, the kind of friends who hold the parts of each other that no one else sees. I had told her things I told no one else. 2 weeks after the funeral, Naomi submitted a signed statement to the court. It described me as emotionally unstable, prone to erratic decision-making, and demonstrably unfit to manage significant financial assets. And it included private moments reframed as evidence. A night I had called her crying reframed as a breakdown. A conversation about financial stress reframed as irresponsibility. I read the statement in Ethan's office. I set it down very carefully. "She called Kim 14 times in October," Ethan said, 10 months before Lila passed. "I know," I said. "You knew about Naomi, too." "I had the phone records," I said. I kept hoping I was wrong about it." There was a pause. "I'm sorry," Ethan said, quietly, not performatively, just actually. "Me too," I said. I looked out his window for a moment. Then, "How do we use the text messages?" And we got back to work. The night before the hearing, I sat at my kitchen table with Lila's journal in front of me. I didn't open it. I just put my hand on the cover. Then I pressed play on the small speaker on the shelf. Songs for when you need to be okay. And I sat there in the dark kitchen and let myself feel all of it. The grief I had been holding at arm's length for months. The specific exhaustion of a woman who has been strategic and prepared and composed while simultaneously being destroyed. And I cried. Properly. The kind that takes something from you and leaves you lighter, which sounds like a contradiction and is not. When I was done, I washed my face, went to bed, got up at 5, put on the blue suit, not black, not gray, not the palette of grief, clear, direct blue. The color of someone who is present and not going anywhere. Drove to the courthouse. In the car, at a red light, I said out loud, "I'm keeping the promise. Today." The light changed. I drove. My family arrived looking confident. 2 attorneys, color-coordinated outfits. I noticed this because of course they did. They had color-coded the documents too. There was apparently a family aesthetic to this operation. Their lead attorney was Jeffrey Slade, loud in the declarative way of men who mistake volume for authority. He opened by describing me as sympathetic, certainly, but demonstrably unequipped. And then, in the 3rd paragraph of his opening statement, used my depression history. He described the night I called Naomi from a hospital bathroom at 2 a.m. while Lila was in the ICU as a documented psychological episode consistent with ongoing instability. I sat beside Ethan and kept my face completely still. "They're doing exactly what we said," Ethan murmured. "Oh, I know," I murmured back. "Don't react. I'm not reacting. Your jaw is doing something." I relaxed my jaw. He almost smiled, which under the circumstances I appreciated. I thought about Lila in a purple sweater saying, "I have a really good life." And I waited. Ethan opened quietly. He presented the emails, the timeline, the hospital records showing Kim's unauthorized access. And then Jeffrey Slade did something I had not fully anticipated. He challenged the hospital investigation. Your Honor, the investigation my colleague references was triggered by an anonymous tip. The source of that tip has never been established. We have no confirmation that the access to these records was unauthorized rather than, for example, a clerical error in the system. The access logs show a specific employee ID, Ethan started. Logs that could have been manipulated, Slade said. We're asking the court to consider that this evidence may not be as clean as presented. The judge looked at the documents, then at Ethan, then over her glasses at the room with the expression of a woman who has presided over a lot of cases and is taking the temperature of this one. Mr. Bright, she said, can you establish the chain of custody on these logs? I felt something shift in my chest. Ethan had told me this was covered. He had told me the chain was clean. But Slade had introduced doubt, and the judge was asking the question, and my mother was sitting 10 feet away with the first expression of something like confidence I had seen on her face since we walked in. Your Honor, Ethan said, we can establish full chain of custody. However, I'd like to request the opportunity to call a witness not previously listed, the hospital's privacy officer, who is available and present in this building today. Slade objected. The judge considered. The room waited. I kept my hands flat on the table and looked at the judge and thought, if this falls apart here, I have the recording. I have the text messages. I have the clause. It does not end here. I made myself believe that. I'll allow it, the judge said. Make it efficient, mister. Bright. Slade sat down with the controlled energy of a man recalibrating. I exhaled exactly once. Told you, Ethan murmured, standing. You didn't tell me that was going to happen, I murmured back. I told you we were covered. There's a difference. Mrs. Dane, he said, almost without moving his mouth. I need to go question someone. He went and questioned someone. The chain of custody was established in 11 minutes. We moved on. The privacy officer's testimony closed the gap Slade had tried to open. Then came the recording. Ethan had not mentioned it to opposing counsel before the hearing. Admissible. I was a participant, recorded in my own home, single-party consent state. He had been saving it. The voice from the speaker was Kim's, recorded 3 weeks after the funeral in my kitchen. Now, in a conversation she had initiated under the pretense of checking on me. Sarah, you should think very carefully about fighting this. You don't have the resources we have. You don't have the support. And honestly, everyone can see how you've been struggling. You won't be able to fight us. The kindest thing you can do is let us handle it and move on. My voice, even. I'll think about it. Kim's voice. Good, because we're doing this either way. The courtroom was very still. Kim's attorney leaned over and whispered something urgent. Kim shook her head. He whispered again. She kept shaking her head. And I understood, watching her, that she had not yet grasped that the recording existed, that she was hearing her own voice and still trying to construct a version of events where this was recoverable. Jeffrey Slade was on his feet. The judge told him to sit down. He sat. My mother, across the room, was looking at Kim with an expression I recognized from childhood. The expression that meant, what did you do and how do we fix it? The answer to the second part of that question was, you don't. She had submitted a written statement, and I think she believed that would be sufficient. Ethan had subpoenaed her testimony. She sat in the witness box with the careful posture of someone trying to look more certain than she felt. And Slade walked her through the statement efficiently, and she confirmed each point with the rehearsed confidence of someone who had practiced. Then Ethan stood up. Ms. Clark, you describe a call from Mrs. and Dane on March 14th as a significant psychological breakdown indicating ongoing instability. Yes. You received a text from Mrs. Dane at 2:14 a.m. that night. Can you read the highlighted portion? He placed the thread on the display. She read, "Lila's fever spiked. They moved her to ICU. I'm so scared. I'm sorry to call so late." Her daughter, Ethan said, was in intensive care. She was very emotional. Her daughter was in the ICU, Miss Clark. Still calm, still precise. "Would you describe calling a friend at 2 a.m. while your child is in intensive care as a psychological breakdown, or as a mother in crisis seeking support from someone she trusted?" Naomi said nothing. "Ms. Clark, I want to give you an opportunity to correct something before I show the court the next exhibit. Is there anything in your statement you'd like to revise?" She looked at her hands. "I stand by my statement," she said. "All right," Ethan said, and placed the phone records on the display. "Kim Reeves called you 14 times in October. That is 10 months before Lila Dane passed away. Would you like to explain the nature of those calls?" Naomi's attorney, who she had hired, I noticed, after receiving the subpoena, leaned forward. "I'd advise my client not to answer." "Your Honor," Ethan said, "the witness submitted a statement to this court describing the plaintiff as unfit. The court is entitled to understand the context in which that statement was prepared." The judge looked at Naomi. "Answer the question, Ms. Clark." A very long pause. "We were discussing the situation," Naomi said finally. Which situation?" The trust. 10 months before Lila Dane died, you were discussing the trust with Kim Reeves." Silence. "Ms. Clark." Ethan's voice did not change, not louder, not harder, just present. "You had 11 years of Mrs. Dane's confidence. She told you things she told no one else, and you took those things, those private, painful things, and you packaged them as evidence for a case against her." A pause. "I don't have a question. I just wanted the court to understand what that is." Slade objected. The judge sustained it, but the room had heard it. Naomi looked, for the first time since she sat down, like she fully understood what she had done and what it had cost. I looked at my hands. 11 years. I thought about Lila's journal. Being kind costs nothing and buys a lot. I didn't look at Naomi again. Jeffrey Slade's closing was shorter than his opening. The confidence had gone out of it, replaced by the careful, recalibrating energy of a man working with significantly less than he'd started with. He maintained that the petition had merit, that Sarah Dane's emotional state remained a concern, that oversight was warranted. He did not mention the emails. He did not mention the recording. He did not mention Naomi. When he sat down, Ethan stood up. "Your Honor, the petitioners have argued throughout this case that they act in the interest of this trust and of Lila Dane's legacy." He paused. "I'd like to draw the court's attention to a provision of the trust document that the petitioners appear not to have read before filing this case." The document appeared on the display. Section 7C, Protective Clause. He read it slowly. In the event that any individual or party attempts to obtain unauthorized access to, control over, or misappropriation of the assets of this trust through legal action, coercion, or misrepresentation, such individual or party shall be permanently and irrevocably disqualified from any benefit, oversight role, or association with the trust, and the matter shall be referred to the appropriate authorities for investigation of fraud, perjury, or related offenses. The room absorbed this. Jeffrey Slade had gone very still. "This clause," Ethan said, "was written and filed 8 months ago, before the petitioners began their campaign, before they accessed medical records, before they recruited witnesses, before they color-coded their documents." I heard Kim make a sound beside her attorney. Not a word, just a sound. It was, in effect, already waiting for them. He looked at the judge. The petitioners did not find a vulnerability in this trust. They walked into a provision specifically written for people who would do exactly what they have done. He let that land for a moment. "Lila Dane's words, Your Honor, as recorded in the trust documentation. This money is for kids like me, not for anyone else." He sat down. Complete silence. And then, I had not planned this. It was not part of any strategy. I looked at my mother. For the first time since she had stood on my doorstep with her color-coded documents, I looked at her directly. She looked back, and I saw, in her face, the specific moment when a person understands that the thing they built has collapsed, not from outside pressure, but from its own weight. I looked away first, not because I had to, because there was nothing left there that I needed. Before the judge ruled, Ethan asked permission to make one additional statement. She granted it. He stood. Your Honor, I'd like to clarify something for the record. The protective clause in this trust was not a defensive reaction to the petitioner's campaign. It was drafted 8 months ago because Mrs. Dane had already identified concerning behavior from her family and had taken steps to document it. Slade started to rise. Furthermore, Ethan continued, Mrs. Dane was aware, during the final months of her daughter's illness, that her family had been monitoring Lila's medical prognosis through unauthorized channels. Rather than confront them, which would have prompted them to adjust their approach, she chose to allow their plan to develop fully while simultaneously building a complete evidentiary record. He looked at the petitioner's table. She did not simply defend herself. She created the conditions under which the full scope of this plan would become visible and provable. A pause. Everything this court has seen today, the emails, the hospital records, the recording, the timeline, exists because Sarah Dane understood what was coming and made sure there would be no ambiguity about what had been done. He sat down. My mother turned and looked at me, not with anger, with something that I think was finally understanding. She knew, her face said. She knew the whole time. I held her gaze. Then the judge spoke. Case dismissed. The protective clause triggered. Referral to fraud investigation. Mandatory, not discretionary. Restraining order granted. All 3 petitioners. Investigation into perjury. Naomi Clark referred separately. The judge looked over her glasses at Jeffrey Slade, then at the petitioner's table, and said, I want to be clear that this court finds the preparation and execution of this petition to be among the more calculated misuses of the legal system I have presided over. The referrals made today reflect that finding. She stood. The room stood. I sat for 1 extra second. Then I stood too. In the marble corridor outside, in the afternoon light through high windows, I stopped walking, stood still, and let myself feel the full weight of it. Not triumph, not satisfaction. Something older and simpler. When the exhale of a woman who has carried something enormous and has finally kept the promise she made. Ethan stood beside me. He didn't say anything, which was, I had learned, his version of everything. After a moment, you should eat something. You haven't eaten since yesterday. I know. There's a reasonable sandwich place on the corner. You're describing a sandwich place right now. You need protein after sustained legal warfare. Ethan. Yes? Thank you, I said. He nodded once. Lila would have liked this outcome, he said. Based on everything you've told me, she would have found it very tidy. I laughed. Actually laughed. The surprised kind, the kind that catches you off guard. It felt like the first real thing I had felt in months. She would have, I said. She really would have. Kim faced charges. The billing administrator had already cooperated with investigators, and Kim's own phone records, subpoenaed during discovery, were thorough. Naomi did not lose her career in a single moment. It was slower than that, and in some ways worse. The statement was public record. The industry she worked in was small. The story of what she had done followed her in the particular way that betrayals do when they are documented and visible. My parents retained separate counsel for the fraud investigation. I do not know the specifics of those outcomes, and I have made a decision not to seek them. Their story is theirs. It does not belong to me anymore. What belongs to me is this: the foundation, the journal, the purple sweater, folded in a box in Lila's room. The promise kept. The Lila Grace Foundation launched 4 months after the hearing. $940,000, properly directed. Medical research, family support, documentation projects, because Lila had believed that stories told honestly were worth something. She had been right. The day of the first public event, I met a girl named Priya, 7 years old, a condition I recognized from years of medical language I had never wanted to learn. Sitting in the corner of the bright, noisy room with a composition notebook, cover decorated in stickers, writing something with the focused intensity of a child who has decided this matters. I sat beside her. "What are you writing?" I asked. She looked at me, clear, direct eyes, the particular quality of children who have spent significant time in hospitals. "Things I know for sure," she said. I looked at her notebook, and I looked at this small person who had never met my daughter and who was, in this moment, more Leela than anything I had encountered since Thursday morning in a room with string lights. "Can I hear one?" I said. She considered this with genuine seriousness. "Sick kids are still just kids," she said. "People forget that." "Yes," I said. "They do. But not everyone." She looked at me steadily. "Some people remember." I nodded. I did not trust my voice for a moment. When I had it back, I said, "I'm going to remember, I promise." She considered whether I meant it. Then she went back to her notebook. And I sat beside her in the afternoon light, and I thought about promises kept and promises still being kept and the specific, extraordinary thing that happens when a child's words outlive the child who said them. They tried to take what Lila left behind. They had been planning it before she was gone. They had used her illness as a countdown, her mother's grief as a weapon, 11 years of friendship as ammunition. They had built a case carefully and filed it confidently and walked into a courtroom certain they had thought of everything. They had not thought of Lila. They had not thought of a clause written by an 8-year-old who told an estate attorney, "This money is for kids like me, not for anyone else," and meant it with the full seriousness of a person who understood that some things needed protecting. They had not thought of a mother who had been watching them plan and had spent 8 months making sure they would have nowhere to go when the courtroom door closed. They had not thought of what grief actually does to some people. It does not produce weakness. It produces the most specific, unbreakable, quietly devastating strength there is. My mother called me once, 8 months after the ruling. I don't know what she intended to say. I let it go to voicemail. I listened to the message once. She said my name and then stopped, and the rest of it was just silence and then the end. And I deleted it, not out of cruelty, out of completion. That chapter was closed. I drive past the hospital sometimes. I stop at the light on the corner. I sit for a moment, and I say, to the car, to the street, to wherever she is, still keeping it, still here. They thought her legacy was something they could own. They thought a trust fund was the thing she left. They lost everything. Their case, their credibility, their family, their freedom, trying to take from a child. And somehow, I think, they still don't fully understand why it went the way it did. They never understood that the money was never the point. The point was Lila. The point was a girl in a purple sweater saying, "I have a really good life," and meaning it completely. The point was a journal entry in a foundation room and a 7-year-old named Priya, writing things I know for sure in the corner of a bright afternoon. The point was a promise. And promises, it turns out, are the one thing you cannot file a petition against. If you liked this story, please support us by subscribing and liking, and kindly drop a comment on the location from where you're watching. Thank you.